My kids are addicted to watching Dan TDM play Minecraft on YouTube.
Nice.
And I don't understand a single word that he's saying. Like, it's literally like entirely in another language.
What's your point?
I think that's the sign of being old.
People say you're aging when you start complaining about every little thing.
That's some kind of milestone right there.
Just wait, Spurti, till you get a little bit older and you tell your kids that there hasn't been good music since the 2010s.
That's right.
Then you'll know how we feel. Best music was in the 70s and 80s. Everything else is crap.
Anything after the turn of the century is like...
Well, it's all auto-tune and just pop music. I mean, it's except for rap and hip-hop.
How long before we'll be able to watch 3D versions of our favorite bands playing in our living room? That's got to be coming, right?
Holograms?
Yeah.
Sure. I don't know if you know this, but India had their elections about 2 or 3 years ago, and the prime minister, during his campaign, so he couldn't be at multiple places, so he spent great amount of money on a hologram. They did a live hologram projection at 5 different places, and he gave a speech.
When they say hologram, that's different. I mean, they're talking about like a laser projection, right? Versus what augmented reality provides is just sort of more of a 3D picture.
That is correct, yeah.
Yeah. When you think of hologram, think, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope.
Yeah. So I went to the doctor yesterday.
Is this for real, or you got a joke coming? Like, it sounds like...
No, this is for real.
My arm hurts when I move like this.
But there's not really a punchline to this one. But I went to the doctor. It takes me like a half an hour to get to the doctor. And then I'm sitting there, and then I'm waiting for the doctor for 20 minutes. And then my actual consult with the doctor literally is like 7 minutes. Then I drive home another 30 minutes. So how long before we just have the 3D camera in our homes and we just like can get in front of it and the doctor logs in or whatever, and then we can show him whatever we need to show him in 3D? Why, that can't be very far away, right?
I think it depends for what. Like, I think you can use FaceTime for certain things. I think you can use telemetry of data, maybe via a wearable or a glucose monitor or things like that. But if you're having a proctology exam, that's probably different.
Hey, yo.
I hope that those are always far in the future.
That's a whole other technology, I think. Yeah. But you're right, though. At some point, all those different technologies are going to converge.
I agree.
And it is already happening. I mean, if you think of things like HealthKit as an example, the ability to link all of that information and provide that securely to your doctor so that they can evaluate, or even, it doesn't have to be for an appointment, but if you have an arrhythmia and something spikes there, Apple talked about that in the new Apple Watch 3 announcement about how it's going to be able to, look at spikes in your heart rate. I think it was like 97 or something higher percentage accuracy. In a perfect world, if it's super bad, like that should trigger a call to 911, right. Or at least to your doctor. So I think that stuff is closer where you can share data securely, as opposed to, I wonder if at some point the basic annual physical changes in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a little jealous of that microphone, Glenn, because usually I'm the one with the best sounding voice on this podcast. But now my authority, I think, is being undermined by the level of bass that you're able to achieve with that microphone.
That's scary.
Well, I'm channeling my inner Barry White.
Wait a minute, I see the problem here. I had the wrong microphone selected. All right, well, thanks a lot, guys, for hopping on, and welcome to another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility worldwide. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all. This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies like Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts, covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing strategy, along with soup to nuts app design development and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. Today we're going to be talking about augmented reality, and I have with me here virtually senior mobile strategist Glenn Gruber and mobile strategist Spurti Gurram.
He's far too young to be a senior.
We'll be talking about augmented reality, something that's very much in the news, especially after the last Apple special event. We'll be talking about a little history of AR and where we're at today and where we think it's going in the near future. And we'll also talk about some use cases, both for the enterprise and for consumers. So that's it. Let's go. Spurti, do you have anything for us?
Did you watch the Google's new Pixel and other announcements? Sundar Pichai gave a statement saying the future of Google is AI.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me because I went to Google I/O this past year, and it was almost like they should have done AI as a drinking game. Because Sundar started with it, and then almost everyone else who followed picked up on the theme, and I would have been hammered by around 10:34 if we actually played the game. But no, I mean, they're a machine learning company essentially at this point. Like for them not to have AI as their target would be odd.
Yeah, because they did announce a new earbuds. They're a direct competition to AirPods, and they work on
shocking.
And they've announced a new pocket camera kind of thing, and that's an AI camera too. What that does is it constantly sees you, but it only records if something interesting is happening.
Sure, it does.
Yeah.
Nobody is buying that.
Hey, guess what? Everything is interesting.
Yeah. I did see someone comment about the always-on microphones, which is...
but that doesn't have a microphone, so...
Fine, the camera doesn't. So anything that it didn't hear, it now sees.
Sure.
Wonderful.
But Steve, I mean, I thought you would be interested because their pitch is, you can point it at your pets and...
It'll tell you what they're thinking.
That's the V2.
Before we get into talking about the state of AR today, I just wanted to give a little background because we'll be talking mostly about AR today, but VR, virtual reality, obviously related topic, has been around a while. I have this book that I actually picked up at the swap shop at the dump from 1995, a scholastic book called Virtual Reality. And the person on the cover is wearing sort of a military-looking helmet with something that sort of looks like a VR device like we have now, just the giant rectangle. And this is 95. So
yeah, well, I mean, I'm not surprised that came up that long ago.
I'm just wondering, what were people running this stuff on?
If you look at Nintendo, they did have a virtual boy, I guess. It was a head-mounted display that you can put on your head and you can play video games.
Yeah. And then, I don't know how many people will remember this, but back in August 2009, Yelp added... Okay, who's that? Is that Glenn?
Yes, I was putting the thing in the mic stand, leave me alone.
Okay. There's a mute feature in Zoom now.
Yeah, there's also a leave meeting feature.
All right. So I remember I was at Aperion at the time in 2009 when this feature came out, and we were all going gaga over this Monocle feature in the Yelp app. It was an Easter egg, and it's still there, strangely enough. If you go into the More section in the bottom right of nav there, You'll see it in the list. It used to have its own button in the top right, but now they want to bury it. But to think that this was originally built for the iPhone 3GS. And so basically you'd point your phone down the street and it would show you a bunch of the little floating Yelp tiles for each of the businesses that were on the street. And then you can tap through each of the tiles to get to the Yelp page for that business. Or the app just crashes, which I think happened more often than not. And then I've got this other AR example here, iSolar System, which was put out by National Geographic. It says augmented reality, iPad, iPhone, iPod, Android. And this one, you point your phone at things in the book, and then you get like the moon lander driving across your living room. So that is like pretty legitimate augmented reality. And I mentioned some of this stuff on our Slack channel that AR apps have been around forever, and I was swiftly reprimanded by Propelics partner Eric Carlson, who said, quote, "I don't agree. This wave is massive technology enablement. Before it was GPS and some sense of orientation. This is a completely different level stuff." Then you've got the HoloLens, which somehow can trace its lineage to Kinect, which was an add-on for Microsoft's Xbox gaming console that was introduced in 2010.
Xbox 360.
Yep. We've got one of those. We had the Kinect.
I had the old one and the new Kinect too.
It was all new to me. We bought it for my daughter so she could do dance party, and then I think she used it twice.
So was it AR?
No. There were two things. So there were certain games that did the AR. Like there was Kinectimals, which is Kinect Animals, so a wordplay. But what that did is it scans your room and it puts those animals in the room. So essentially you can interact with them in a way that you can kick it and it kind of goes away from the screen. Essentially it acts like a real object. But that's pretty much it. So there was no real augmentation in terms of putting something in your living room or stuff like that. It was more to do with motion tracking. So there was multiple levels of tracking involved in Kinect. So it did the depth. It knew if my room had a table and the height and the distance from which the table is to me. So when it puts an animal in your living room, so it interacts differently if it's on the floor or if it's on a table, because it understands there's a distinction there. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of augmentation because you can see your real room, but you can see the animal in the real world. So there was a little bit of augmentation, but that was not the sole purpose for Kinect. I think Kinect was more to do with 3D tracking of your body. So you can, like Glenn was saying, Dance Central or fitness. You can move your limbs and hands and it can do all of that. So essentially, I think that is what the pitch for Kinect was. And then augmentation was something that it could do.
So for those who don't know, Microsoft HoloLens is a pair of mixed reality smart glasses. Okay, so is there a difference between mixed reality and augmented reality? Are those the same thing?
Marketing terms.
That's just marketing. Like, because the HoloLens people are driving me crazy with their videos. They all talk about holograms and stuff. And then in all the comments, everybody's like, that's not a hologram.
Yeah.
So the HoloLens gained popularity for being one of the first computers running the Windows mixed reality platform under the Windows 10 OS. But currently there's a commercial suite with enterprise features that sells for $5,000. But if we go back to 2013, of course, that's when Google Glass came out. Mm-hmm. So Google Glass was an optical head-mounted display designed in the shape of a pair of eyeglasses. It was developed by X, previously Google X, with the mission of producing a ubiquitous computer. Google Glass displayed information in a smartphone-like hands-free format, and wearers communicated with the internet via natural language voice commands. And they started selling a prototype on April 2013 for $1,500 before it became available to the public in May of 2014. And then soon thereafter, everybody just rejected it outright.
Yeah. Because it wasn't just natural language interactions, it was unnatural head movements. That was another big part of how you used it, which was parodied extremely well on Saturday Night Live. If you haven't seen it, just look it up on YouTube.
I think the biggest concerns with Google Glass was that there was no clear direction. It initially said, hey, you can get directions to your head-mounted display, or you can make video calls, but the other person can't see you. They can see what you are seeing. I mean, you're doing a video call, you want people to see you. That's the reason you call. In a consumer space, it didn't make sense, but that's the market they went after.
There were also a lot of privacy concerns where people were worried they were being videoed and so forth without knowing it. And it made everybody look like a cyborg. So it had a lot of problems. But in July of 2017, they announced that Google Glass Enterprise Edition would be released.
Yeah, correct.
Which makes much more sense.
Yeah, this should have been their focus all along. Like, this is where they should have started.
Right. But, it's not surprising. I mean, A, because of the whole moonshot thing with Google of trying to do something, huge. So let's target all the consumers. But B, it's something that, like, you see time and again where someone thinks that they have a great idea. And even though everything tells you, let's start small, let's start focused, let's find people who have a very specific problem that this can solve and can afford to pay more for it now because of that unique issue that they have, so that you can continue with your R&D and drive down the cost of the device so that eventually it would maybe make sense to have a broader audience for it. People don't want to stop at the small chunk to get started. They often do try and go ahead with it. I mean, I remember when I was at Kyocera 20 some odd years ago, and they were starting with the whole Iridium satellite phone project. I remember internally consulting with a couple of people in that business, and they were talking about how we can make the handset X dollars and we can get down to $3 a minute to try and compete with the feature phones that existed at that time. And I was trying to persuade them to, hey, how about trying to sell it to everyone on an oil rig or places where there is no cellular connectivity, but being connected is really, really, really important. But they were not open to doing that because it wasn't a large enough market for them to want to tackle at that time. And I think that that's a problem with all of these different emerging technologies. You can get so excited about the category and the potential that you don't take the pragmatic steps to look for the people who are going to be those early adopters, who can be the guinea pigs, who would be willing to work through the problems that new technologies are just going to have, and also pay the money because we're not at a mature state. We're not going to build 200 million of these things. We're going to build 200,000. And therefore, that changes the whole economies of scale of production and your costs. Even if the BOM costs don't change dramatically, you still have all the tooling that needs to be amortized over a smaller number of devices than a larger number. And so therefore, the marginal cost of the product is going to be higher. And so you need a special kind of buyer who's willing to take that journey with you at that stage in the product's development to enable all that so that one day you can make something bigger, better, and broader.
Then in September 2015, Snapchat lenses came out that would let people turn themselves into animals or Disney characters. And then probably the most famous example in July 2016, Pokemon Go showed up, which utilized GPS to locate, capture, battle, and train virtual Pokemon. I don't know if you guys have heard about Magic Leap. It's very mysterious. All I could find is that they are, quote, using our dynamic digitized light field signal. Imagine being able to generate images indistinguishable from real objects and then being able to place those images seamlessly into the real world. And on their website, there's like pictures of a lot of people enjoying AR without wearing any glasses. So I don't know what that's about. Maybe they're onto something really huge.
I think that there was maybe a Wired article a couple of years ago that really put them on the scene. It was pretty in-depth. What they talk about looks amazing, but there's still a lot of hardware that is involved and it's still wired, but they're very much trying to go along the lines of, not just being able to see things, but to be able to manipulate, essentially like look like you're opening a file drawer or something like that to get at information so that, yes, it really is like a part of how you work and a part of the experience, not just visually seeing things overlaid, but really being able to interact with them. Kind of like Tony Stark, but not quite to where Tony Stark got just yet.
So are we going to go through the whole like skeuomorph process again, the way we did with phones? Are we going to see like, actual drawers that are, virtual, or things that really look like file cabinets, and we're going to be expected to like pull them open and then shuffle through them and then pull a file out and then go through it, and then we'll evolve past that and it'll actually just turn out to be like a big rectangle.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's possible. Again, like if you're trying to put people in a virtual environment that they are able to do the things that they would do as if they had real stuff around them, you're still going to want to interact. So maybe instead of physically having to look like you're pulling and opening a drawer, you just kind of tap on it and then swipe up and swipe around. Like I'm sure that there's someone smarter than me in this regard will come up with all sorts of awesome gestures to do this with. But I think for a lot of people, if you're trying to mimic that, virtually extend the environment that they're working in, you don't want things to be completely different than how they're used to working until they get to a point where, this is not a new concept anymore. And therefore, now you can start to use different methods to interact rather than the familiar methods. I think that's where the skeuomorphism probably came from, is how can we get people to get used to this style of computing? Just like looking, a long ways back, one of the reasons why Solitaire shipped with Microsoft in Windows 3.1 many, many moons ago, probably before Spurti was born, that was just to get people to learn how to use the mouse and how to manipulate the mouse and get used to that as a computing pointing device.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
What if the other game, there was like Minefield or?
That was also the same thing. That was even smaller, targets, and Solitaire was, and both of them very addicting at the same time.
Yeah.
I know I probably blew a lot of productive hours on both of those.
The thing is, to manipulate or to mix both the digital and the real world is that you need some kind of projection. Microsoft had something called Illumiroom.
Illumiroom?
Yeah. That was before they announced Xbox One, the latest Xbox.
Spurti has a little bit of a flu, people, so
yeah.
Illumiroom.
And a bit of a band crush on HoloLens, but
oh, I've kind of been loving the HoloLens too after watching those videos.
Yeah, you anyone would fall in love with that technology. I mean, so there's supposed to be a Kinect sensor that can scan your room and have a projector in the room that essentially extends your display. So what that's supposed to do is, let's say you're playing a game and you kill someone, and so there's an extension to your just a 65-inch or a 55-inch TV. So it actually projects the extension of those images on the wall. And the whole wall kind of shakes in a way that it shows those kind of like a 3D projection where, you can see that the wall is shaking or a wall is breaking. So you get that feel that, oh, maybe I shot too hard, or I killed someone too hard that, the whole wall is shaking. Or it could be a game that is simulating earthquakes and you can see the whole thing tumbling. So my point being that you still need projection to simulate augmentation. So coming back to your point where you said about the drawers and you do the actions of actually looking through the papers and so on. So for that, you really need a real object on which you can do a projection to simulate that.
Well, unless you're wearing some kind of a
right,
goggle
or you could have a projector that's omnidirectional or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're pretty close to what Tony Stark dream of Iron Man is. So you can essentially have things projected in front of you so that you don't have to wear a display.
So the big news, of course, is Apple introducing ARKit at WWDC back in June. And Google introduced ARCore in August. So, guys, how is today's AR technology different level stuff from this iSolar System book and the Yelp app and so forth?
There are a couple of significant differences. One is just the realism in which all of these operate and the fidelity. And a lot of that is driven by just the silicon on the device of what it can actually do. I mean, you look at the performance of the A11 Bionic chip on the A8 and, it's commensurate to my MacBook Pro in performance. I mean, it's unbelievable what you can do. And once you can start driving all of those pixels the way that you can today, you can do things that are very different and where back to the Monocle, example, it was just simple overlays of, hey, Joe's coffee shop is open, from 9 to 6 and 50 cents off your next latte, kind of things where it was very low fidelity, very little information, no real interactivity. One of the things that was really striking to me in looking at the announcement of ARKit was how even as you got closer to the plane that you were kind of looking at, so like say you were looking at a city that was superimposed on a table, as you got closer, things got bigger, that perspective played out, and even they had the audio of what was going on got louder, so that your presence in that space changes as you start to interact with these different scenes or different information. So I think that's one really significant change. And the other is just that ARKit and ARCore do a great job of taking all the super intensive tasks of figuring out how would I set up all these kind of fundamental underpinnings and basically invoking a couple of lines of code. And now that's all available to you instead of having to build it all custom. So the ability for everybody to start building these sorts of applications right away, fairly easily using the same tools and platforms that they were using 10 minutes ago, dramatically changes the game as to who can begin to get involved.
Yeah, and a little more to that is the commitment from Apple and Google says that it's not just the APIs or the level of access to the metal. And it's much more to do with the sensors as well. So if you see Project Daydream, before ARCore, they call it Daydream. So there were certain requirements for the sensors to be present on the phone because Android comes in all kind of flavors. So when it came to Apple, if you see the ARKit, it shows best on iPhone 8 and 8 Plus. But they definitely work on 7 and 7 Plus, and same with the 6S and 6S Plus. But it actually helps accelerate, like Glenn was saying, definitely exposure to APIs would make it easier for developers to make great apps for AR. And I think majority would be to do with the sensors and the kind of support that both Apple and Google would play and take it forward.
Yeah. And also, both of those platforms allow you to do all of that on the smartphones on which they work, as opposed to, up until then, the only way to really do that was with these sort of goggle or head-mounted display type of solutions with this external hardware that you had to be hooked up to, and you couldn't really move around that much, or at least you were somewhat limited because of the tethering to this hardware. So I think that's another really big impact. And the other thing that I thought that Spurti kind of touched on is that what's great about the ARKit solution is that pretty much every device of the 800 million iOS devices that are out there, this is going to work out of the box on the next 400 or 500 million of them right out of the gate. And what was a little disappointing from Google's announcement is that the blog post or press release starts out saying that Android has 2 billion different devices that are out there, and it's the largest in the ecosystem. However, ARCore is only going to work on the Pixel, I guess, and now the Pixel 2, and the Samsung S8. And so that's like only a couple of million. So the scale in which Apple is operating in right now is dramatically different than the scale in which Google is. So big advantage to the iOS community at this point. And because of the fragmentation of Android's ecosystem, it's kind of unknown as to when they're going to start to get to really significant numbers. I think that same blog post referenced 100 million by the end of the preview. Of course, they didn't say when the preview was going to end. So I don't know if that's 2017, 18, 19, who knows? But clearly, Apple's going to have a significant reach advantage in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so huge advantage for Apple. So although from what I read, it sounded like in terms of capability, the two ARCore and ARKit are pretty close. And in terms of the user experience, pretty much indistinguishable. ARKit may have some more reliable tracking. ARCore may have some advantages around mapping and recovery, whatever that means. But from what I read, it says both of these advantages are mostly only noticeable by computer vision engineers who know what to look for. So do you think that the advantage with Apple is going to be enough to actually draw people away from Android?
You mean in terms of abandoning the Android ecosystem just to have an iOS device?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I would agree with Spurti. Probably not. Mostly because if you look at the 3 billion people who have smartphones today, and you try and identify the portion of people who are going to be interested out of the box in AR experiences, it's a really low number in comparison. Like, it's certainly my parents aren't going to care. My sisters aren't going to care. They're probably not going to ever know that this stuff happens until maybe, either their children or grandchildren show them. So I don't think it's going to change device preferences, but it's going to certainly impact developer interest. Because if I have a chance to develop for 500 million or for 5 million, who am I going to choose? Especially when that 500 million is the more economically advantageous. It's interesting about Microsoft because I think they're playing by necessity, they're playing a different game.
Yeah.
So they're not in the mobile phone game, literally and figuratively. They're just not there. So their target really does need to be a HoloLens or some other type of device, because at this point, I feel like kind of the die is cast. I think that they would have a really tough time trying to introduce yet another round of Windows 10 smartphone devices and get basic developer traction, let alone doing it for the express purpose of getting people to want to adopt their mixed reality platform. So I think that they have to look at it in a different way. And I think it's going to have them continue to be more focused, as their business is really changing significantly, to be more focused on the enterprise than on consumers.
I might slightly disagree with your point that Microsoft doesn't have a mobile play. They do, just that they don't have a hardware play. But if it speaks in terms of services for Microsoft, I think they're at a unique advantage of both Android and iOS now that they're out of the hardware business, at least for now, that they can clearly focus on if this mixed reality becomes a platform or people use those technologies to build AR applications, then if somehow they can be brought over to both iOS and Android, I think Microsoft does have a play in there, but I think that is what they're targeting with their mobile play. But yeah, they definitely don't have a hardware investment in terms of mobile.
Well, we can bet a really nice dinner on how quickly we think that either Tim Cook or Sundar Pichai is going to allow the Microsoft mixed reality platform to play on their devices and all the advantages that they're giving their own platforms. What chance does Microsoft really have to compete in that arena as a third-party platform that's not going to have the same level of hardware and software integration?
Yeah, it again comes back to something like development tools, right? Because you could use just like Xamarin, which is like an SDK. So I would assume there's some kind of an open standards or a bit of common core between both iOS and Android. Because if you look at it, pretty much there's a parity between what ARKit and ARCore could do, and I'm assuming there's a Microsoft play somewhere in there. My guess is that there is a way that Microsoft is looking to have a play in both iOS and Android. Out of necessity or in the position that they're in, they're focusing much on the laptops and the desktop market, using the mixed reality and trying to bring it more to the consumers. I don't know, but I do think they do have a mobile play.
I think we're all in agreement, at least, that AR has more applications in the enterprise than in the commercial space, at least in terms of being able to force people to wear the goggles and so forth. So I was really kind of surprised to see that at the Apple event, that how much they emphasized gameplay with AR and sort of ignored all of the practical enterprise use cases that are available. They featured the AtBat app that would give you real-time player stats on top of the game. They featured Sky Guide, which was superimpose a map of the stars against this actual sky. And they featured a game called The Machines, which is an AR game that you can sort of place it on your table or whatever. And I think they also had the IKEA catalog in there. And they did some immersive storytelling. So they focused on placing virtual objects in the real world, but isn't the better use case placing virtual objects around real objects as a way to elaborate on those real objects or provide instruction around those objects? A lot of that will be the enterprise use cases. So why do you think that they chose to go that direction? Is it just how those Apple events traditionally run, or do you think they had a specific strategy in mind?
That's how usually the WWDCs usually are. They're more consumer focused and very less enterprise focused in terms of what features they are. And I think it's more to create some kind of buzz around AR. I think that's the reason many people are talking about AR in the first place. But I'm sure that they are looking at the enterprise applications, and I'm sure they kind of would go out with some kind of material that would say they'll speak to the enterprises and the development teams. Would say, hey, you can talk about the enterprise applications for this AR kit. But I think for them to get focused on the consumer side by games or some kind of kid-friendly stuff, I think that creates a lot of buzz. I mean, that's the typical Apple.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that's the audience of those events primarily. I agree with Spurti on that. Doesn't surprise me at all. Plus, you look at groups like the MLB, Major League Baseball, like their Advanced Technologies group has done a number of things. They were in on some of the early like Beacon kind of programs and have been brought up on stage a number of times. So that seems to make sense to me.
Have any of you guys talked about AR with any of our clients yet, and about what maybe they should be thinking about building?
Not yet, but I was at Medtronic last week and the week before, and I did see a lot of their demos. Like they did have a screen that they were talking about AR and VR, but that was more of an educational use cases, like, hey, what do you do and what do you don't? So there's no clear path for them, but it looks like they're already involved in that discussion about, okay, we need to think about AR and VR, and it's coming and we have to be there. But I don't think they do have a clarity as yet, but there was some interest.
We are talking about it with one client who I'm not sure if I should name because they may see this as a competitive advantage. But they're talking about using AR to place clothes on the workers, to determine size and look and so forth, which is like a perfect use case. But what else do you guys think that, the enterprise should be looking at building?
I'm taking this out of HoloLens video promo, but there's a design about a motorcycle. Maybe it could be AutoCAD or something, where you can if you're like architecture or maybe design, like automobile design or anything that you're trying to build, you can actually make a model of it and make it, you can see it physically in a real space, so you can see to the scale. And I think that kind of applications for any architecture or design is a great win for AR.
Similarly, like where I would start, and this can kind of get us down a road of head-mounted display or not head-mounted display, and the different ways that you can try and leverage AR today. But anytime where you've got people who are kind of out in the field in some way, certainly not like in a desk-bound kind of environment, and where hands-free can be useful. Field technicians is one good example. And this is where maybe if someone's already using kind of like the digital twin methodology in their design of parts or industrial equipment, and then you're going out to fix that, to be able to maybe superimpose that or put side by side that digital twin to what the engineer is seeing in front of them, to try and diagnose what the root cause of whatever the failure is at that point, that could be really valuable. And again, to be able to maybe manipulate some of those things, to take that widget, kind of spin it around and, is that the way it's supposed to look from this angle type of thing, I think can be really useful. And I know that there's also another, not a client of Propelics, but one of the members of the Emerging Technology Council, which we do with Maribel Lopez of Lopez Research, did a smart glasses POC in a warehouse environment. So that as they're looking to pick and pack different goods, it's easier for them to determine where is that item on my manifest that I should be getting, and to really help point that out. Those are some really good use cases, but I would certainly encourage people listening to this podcast thinking about where to get started. And this harkens back to where we were talking about Google Glass, to look for the narrow use cases. Look for things where there's a real problem to be solved, that you're willing to kind of endure a little bit of pain, absorb a little bit of cost as you're doing the evaluation. I mean, all this from a technology maturity perspective, these smartphones 10 years old. This stuff is a fraction of that, the Monocle notwithstanding. These new platforms like ARKit and ARCore and the Microsoft Mixed Reality are like a year old. So there's so much to be learned and lessons that we have to learn as we go through it, that look for a relatively narrow use case, figure out which users can really be impacted by this, and then get started there. Don't look for something that 90% of your workforce can use. I mean, if you can find something, great, but that's unlikely to be where your starting point is.
AR really has applications anytime that you sort of need immediate data about the world around you or about some object or machine that exists in the real world. If it can communicate a problem that the machine is having and then tell you exactly how to fix it through AR, that seems like an obvious use case. You could eliminate any kind of training and just let the glasses become the trainer, basically. Just learn things in real time.
Yeah, I can think of one application. Like I don't remember which device that was, but it had some infrared sensors in the back that can detect temperature. So imagine an AR application where you're looking at a machinery and that can gauge the temperature of each part and can tell you which is overheating than what it's supposed to be, and you can pinpoint that location and can overlay information on top of it saying, hey, you can probably fix this part by using such and so action, that you can fix this issue. So there could be a combination of sensors that you could use for AR applications to make it easy to troubleshoot, especially machinery or anything that usually requires past knowledge or experience in those area. But with AR applications, I think you can.
Yeah, and when it provides that feedback, it doesn't even have to be in the form of like a set of numbers. That's the thing. Like that's where the learning curve gets eliminated. Like it could just be in the form of a thermometer or a steam kettle, or just showing that part turning red and smoke coming out of it. I mean, whatever graphical representation you think is going to communicate the most meaning, you can create that.
Yep.
So it's still a bummer that AR is just on the phones and you have to hold your phone up to see this stuff. Do you think Apple is planning on developing some kind of a Google Glass, the next generation Google Glass type device?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I don't know. When we were talking about this earlier, like Neil Seibert from Above Avalon, I think has an article about, of course, Apple glasses are inevitable, was essentially his perspective. I'm not so sure, but only because, I mean, Tim Cook wears glasses, so maybe that's possible.
Jonathan Ive doesn't.
And Mark Newsom, who's one of the designers that they've brought in from time to time to specifically working on the watch, but also has done eyewear design in his past. All of that is possible, but I'm also of a mind that I don't think that the glasses are the long-term goal. It may be an interim necessity to be able to do hands-free type of things today, but I don't think it's what people want. I mean, one of the reasons why people say that the glasses are inevitable or why they're great is because glasses are all about utility. The most utility being that people would like to be able to see, and that's pretty high up in your hierarchy of needs of wanting to be able to see clearly, rather than walk around like Mr. Magoo. Another reference Brady probably won't get. But I also don't know many people who have glasses like myself who, if they didn't need glasses, would want glasses. I know that more and more it's kind of like a fashion accessory, but that's because you can choose to wear them for dinner and then take them off and go on with your normal happy life. So I think that there's issues with that being a long-term thing. I don't think people want to have eyewear on all the time to do some of these things. And especially if you want to deploy this to an organization and you've got 1,000 field technicians, 60% of which wear glasses, and now you need to get prescription versions of each one of these, and when they quit you have to then get a new prescription for the next guy. Like there's a lot of things that makes it unwieldy. It is fabulous for being able to do hands-free, but I got to think that all of this is until we get to a point where we can do real holographic projections or photonic, whatever they called it on Star Trek: The Next Generation, to create objects that, not only you can see them visually, but also can actually feel them. So to me, this feels like more, this is what we have to do because this is where we are from a technology perspective. That's why most of these, head-mounted devices, particularly the ones for VR, are super expensive, have to be hooked up to another super expensive computer and able to render the way that you want. That's why I'm not sure whether or not, the glasses is a thing or is just a crutch until we can get to the real thing.
I agree with Glenn, but I think Apple is definitely working on a wearable, but I don't think that's their play. So just like usual Apple, they're going to wait it out and make sure that that's the market that they're intending it. But I think they're working on a wearable, but I wouldn't bet on them announcing anything in the near future.
They did get me to wear a watch. I haven't worn a watch in like 10 years.
Yeah. Well, to me, the bigger thing is that they got me from wearing my other watches to wearing this watch most of the time. Yeah.
Do you think there's going to be contact lenses? You think it's going to go glasses to contact lenses to some kind of projection?
Well, I mean, to me, the contact lenses would be at least a somewhat better solution. I mean, I'll go back. There's never been a good idea that hasn't been done in science fiction first. It's like you go back to Lee Majors, the $6 Million Man. And that bionic eye was pretty awesome, in terms of what it could do. You look at, the Terminator, to be able to have all the other kind of displays of what, he's seeing before he decides to, kill the wrong person.
You could just say Mission Impossible, which is a newer movie like people like me can relate to.
That was a TV show from the 60s.
I think that that something like that might be better because it's not anything you have to kind of outwardly carry on your face. I mean, there's also an issue of the fashion sense that glasses are a big part of. And if you can get rid of that, there's benefit to that as well. Plus, it's lighter. It doesn't interfere with your peripheral vision. There's all these other benefits that something like a contact lens could bring that would be beneficial, but it's all about not having to actually wear a pair of glasses or something on your face. I mean, even Geordie LaForge, he never wanted to wear that banana clip on his face. He just did it because that's the technology that they had, and he was otherwise blind. So that was a better solution than nothing. But, in one of the other episodes, he ends up having essentially contacts or bionic eyes as a replacement, and the banana clip is gone, and he's happier for it. We're all happier. We don't have to wear something on our face.
How about swapping out one eyeball? You give up one eyeball.
Just one?
Yeah, because, just in case the network goes down or something. And then they give you one AR eyeball. Would you do that? What do you think?
I don't think that's going to fly. But yeah, I could see, lenses becoming a thing. It's much more to do with projectors in real life than us putting anything inside our bodies.
Another interesting component of the iPhone 10 is what's in the sensor bar. The flood illuminator, all the 3D things, it's basically like a little tiny Connect module.
It actually is, yeah.
Yeah. So right now, just like they often do, they take a new technology and they use it for one single express purpose until it's time for the next purpose that they want to reveal. But if you're able to do all that 3D sensing to sense your face, I think eventually they'll either put one on the back also, so that as you're looking out and looking at the screen, you can get much better fidelity and representation. I mean, this is maybe more along the lines of some of what, I can't remember what Google calls it, was part of their like TensorFlow, but where you can get much better understanding of the room and the space that you're in via that. And perhaps like if Apple ever did glasses, I could see something like, on the bridge, across the bridge of the nose, if you took one of those little sensor bars and put it on there, and then you can get really high fidelity of what you're seeing and the good 3D representation of what's in your environment. That can lead to some really awesome capabilities, and again, it's back to how can you get economies of scale, on different sensor technology.
Hey, what about the connection between AR and self-driving car technology?
Yeah, good that you brought that up. But I was thinking, we can consider heads-up displays, which have been there for forever. They're AR too, right? Because they project information in front of you. And
yeah, but it's not always context. Yeah, there was like the heads-up displays in cars that just
navigation.
Yeah, it could be navigation, but if you're just putting like the speedometer, that those things are definitely out there, and there's value, because there's value in being able to maintain your attention where it needs to be on the road. Or in the case of fighter planes, it was like you don't want to have to be looking down if you have a MiG-23 flying at you. You want to be able to actually know where that guy is. So that was also about utility. For sure.
I found this statement that at this point, there's almost no difference between tracking for AR and tracking for self-driving cars, except AR systems do it with fewer sensors and lower power.
Correct.
The actual tracking of the world, the three-dimensional plane tracking and so forth, light estimation, they all have in common. So I'm wondering, like, self-driving car technology is just so gung-ho right now. And I wonder how it will influence AR technology, or if they'll both sort of feed off each other and they'll both benefit for it and the development will be that much faster as a result.
Yeah, so that makes sense because the more AR scanning and approximations and people nail the algorithms, it's much more easier and becomes affordable for cards to do that. Because right now it's cumbersome, it's expensive, they have too many sensors. So if we're able to use the technology from AR and if they can be translated to self-driving cars, I think that's a big win. I think you're right.
Tim Cook actually said AR, I think, is going to become really big. How long will it take? AR is going to take a little while because there's some really hard technology challenges there, but it will happen. It will happen in a big way. And we will wonder when it does happen how we lived without it, kind of how we wonder how we lived without our smartphones today. I feel like, with self-driving cars and AR, I feel like we're really on the verge of these really game-changing technologies just taking over in a huge way. I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, and really just changing our way of life.
These are all impactful technology. And I think that with any new technology, it's easy to look back and see the impact that was had, but it's really hard to project forward as to what that's going to have, like how we're going to use AR in our lives, how it's going to really impact us, I think is still a story to be written. It's a lot more straightforward when you think about the driving car because of that unique job of understanding the environment around the car for it to do what it needs to do to be truly self-driving. But I think that we're going to find that there's a lot more use cases, a lot more opportunities that happens with AR than the handful of ideas that we discussed today.
Speaking of what impact it could have, I was telling this story before as well, is that my wife looked at a furniture on Crate and Battle, and she kind of liked the center table. So A, it was expensive. B, I don't think it fit in our living room, but she wanted it. So we were using the app to do the shopping. So I looked at, they have this feature where you can put furniture in your living room. So that was kind of fun. So we did that. And when I showed it to her and she accepted that, oh yeah, it doesn't fit. So that kind of saved me money. So it had some impact.
That kind of stuff is fine. But how do you feel about, having an ever-present digital layer applied to the real world? I mean, it sounds like exciting and cool, but it's like once that happens and we've all agreed that that's the way we want to go, suddenly people who don't have it are at a huge disadvantage. And I don't know, what happens if you get sick of it? I mean, you're kind of stuck with it. It seems like a real Pandora's box of technology.
Right. So it kind of is similar to surveillance today. So, you being, so some people have concerns about privacy, which is a genuine concerns, but it again comes down to that, just because I don't need it. So I think we're eventually going to a place where everyone has a digital layer on top of what a real world is. But if you ask Elon Musk, he's going to say we're all digital anyway. So if comes a time, there's a digital layer on top of every day, I think that's where we'll eventually get at. And it's about how people would like to use it. Do I want to interface with the digital world, or I can choose not to? But it'll just put you in a disadvantage, but that's about it.
Yeah, my big concern is that this almost becomes too pervasive. Like I see with my daughter, as I'm sure a lot of us see with their kids, that the phone becomes so central that I can't get her to actually talk to or call one of her friends. It's only texting. Everything becomes centric and everyone's always looking down at their phones. And if this becomes so pervasive, kind of out in the wild, as it were, and people are using AR kind of like all the time, then there's just less, I don't know if this is just old curmudgeon, get off my lawn kind of thing, but just less, interaction between people. And maybe, again, just, more focus on other things that aren't there than the things that are.
Yeah, I mean, it redefines the very idea of what's there and what isn't there, really. I mean, we may wind up interacting more with people in our lives who aren't physically there than we're interacting with people who actually are there in the room.
before Glenn calls me a fanboy, yesterday on a Microsoft event, they did display a place where you put on your head-mounted displays and you become an avatar, and then you can talk to people like virtually. And like, let's say Glenn puts on his VR goggles. For all we know, we could be doing this podcast on a VR or AR platform where we are all sitting in a pool, like a beach, and each of us are looking at each other, and we can talk about it, but we can just be talking to avatars and stuff like that. I mean, that was cool, and it goes back to the same point. I might not be talking to my wife who's sitting right next to me, but I might be virtually sitting right next to someone who's not even there.
Hopefully it's not your girlfriend. That would be awkward. It's also interesting, like I was listening to Daring Fireball, the talk show podcast with John Gruber, and yeah, they were just talking about the improvements just in cameras on smartphones as they were talking about the new devices, and how you look back on pictures that he or I, Steve, you and I are of the same age roughly, that we took a decade ago when our kids were young, or the quality of the videos that we took on the camcorders that we had, versus today we have 4K, 60 frame per second, unbelievable quality of video and photos that you can take and improve them with computational photography. In 10 years, looking at those 4K images today, is that going to somehow feel like standard definition video does to us now? Are we going to be looking at real holograms, that are more 3D? Again, we have these other 3D sensors now, rather than flat 2D images. And how does that just change so many things about, who we are, what we do, and, how we remember things?
I think that's inevitable. It's going to have to happen. And in 3D, once we have these sort of holographic virtual 3D images, and, another 10 years, we'll be looking at those and we'll be going, oh, those aren't as 3D as the new holograms that we have. And, where does it end?
It ends in the Matrix.
The singularity.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to try not to get on my Kurzweil misusing the term singularity rant. The black hole is a singularity. AI
Glenn,
is not.
Maybe Glenn, you should try HoloLens demo if you get
Maybe that'll change your mind.
I've seen some of the demos. I don't think that they have the HoloLens at the little pop-up Microsoft store at my local mall. So right now I can only live vicariously through YouTube.
It's magical. Like, for me, it was unreal, because I've tried Google Glass before, like in 2013. I tried that, and it felt like a 70-inch TV, up close to my face. And that's how I felt when I looked at Google Glass. But when I did try HoloLens, it kind of blew my mind. And there was a 3D audio, which is exactly what Glenn was talking about. Like, I got closer to something and it got louder. It's like spatial audio or 3D audio, what they call, but it was magical. But the problem with that was there's a viewfinder that, there's only a piece of screen that you can see the holograms or the augmented part of it, but that didn't take away my experience. Like, I was really blown away when I looked at, and it was a real Mars surface that I was on, and I felt like I was there. And I think if they were able to make it smaller, or a device, or if they make it better, I think everyone would love to wear a device. I'm sure. We were in a room, and that room kind of had those crater things, so it was not a plain room. It was kind of uneven, but you could see that the projection was kind of adjusting to those imperfections in the ground. So when I looked at it, it didn't feel like, okay, I'm blocked from everything else, and this is like a VR experience. It felt like an AR experience, because when I was there, it didn't feel like I was cut off from everything else, because I was still comfortable in, when I was trying to navigate to certain things.
I guess that's what's coming next, is the 3D reconstruction. That is like the AR system being able to actually figure out the shape or structure of real objects in the world, and then be able to interact with those objects virtually.
Right.
Versus just detecting a plane. But who can't fall in love with that video of the dude with his kid?
Yeah.
And she's walking around the room and asking him when he's going to be home from work and stuff.
It's an exact replica of the same room at two different places. And she was sitting on that small side table or cushion, and he could see her sitting on that same table. That felt magical. I mean, that video it's amazing.
Yeah. How far off do you think that is that we'll all have these projectors set up in our room to recreate those virtual environments with other people where we want to just share that kind of experience?
The projectors do exist, that they can display information and they can project stuff in the real world. But I think it's more to do with, in the commercial space, how to make it smaller and effectively cheaper to manufacture and also economical to run. That's a challenge. I mean, but it's inevitable though. I mean, I think that's where we're heading, like having omnidirectional projectors, like the small things that you can place someplace, and it projects real 3D images to your real life.
Do either of you guys have a good closer?
Let the Wookiee win.
Oh, I get it. Well, thanks for hopping on, guys. And thank you for listening to another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Take care.